Welcome. I'm Matthew Phelps, co-author of the Turning to God's Word Bible study, Thus Says the Lord, God Speaks Through His Servants, the Prophets. Today we'll be talking about Lesson 23, the final lesson of our study, which covers additional selections from the book of Revelation. In this lesson, we pick up in just about the middle of the book of Revelation. There's a lot in this book that is very complicated. The very middle of it is by far the most complicated. And again, it is not the project of these lessons so much to comprehensively explain the book of Revelation in 2 lessons as it is to highlight some of the key points, especially those illuminated by the study of the prophets. So we'll be skipping things. We won't be taking a deep dive into a whole lot of neat things that are happening because it takes too much for the time and space that we here have. But that said, there are things that are very worth not skipping, and it's definitely an interesting conclusion to a study of the prophets to look at how the book of Revelation reinterprets, restates those writings of the prophets and other parts of the Old Testament that we probably are also familiar with. Case in point, here we see an angel with a rainbow over his head. While that doesn't come up in great detail that I recall in our study of the prophets, there's a key and very important reference to the Old Testament in that, and that would be, of course, the sign of the covenant after God spares Noah and his family and the flood subsides, and there's a rainbow. And it means a very important thing, right? And that's where these references matter. It means I, God, am never again going to destroy the world by flood, which sounds a little too qualified, but what other ways, God? You have a lot of other means available. Do you really mean there's just not going to be a bunch of rain that kills everybody and you'll do it a different way next time? Or does it mean something more significant? And that's where the setup matters a lot, right? It, of course, means something more significant. That idea of the waters and the flood is symbolically and more than symbolically an unmaking or an uncreation of the world. As God created the world, day 1, let there be light. Day 2, it was seen as just this vast body of water, and you start separating out the waters above and the waters below and carve out this space for things to exist on or in. So the idea of rain coming down from above and making above and below the same, like you're undoing days 2 through 7 of creation and everything that comes after. So the implication of that promise is not just, I won't make it rain until it kills you all. It's a promise of, I won't undo, I won't unmake my creation. You are created, you will be created. And whatever entails, whatever that necessitates, is what will happen. And that's what this is in the book of Revelation, this is what's necessitated by that promise. So it's so important now that this angel, who is probably Jesus, shows up talking about we should sound this last trumpet and bring everything to fulfillment, and he's wearing this rainbow when he does it to remind everyone in heaven and on earth that this last sounding of this trumpet, this fulfillment, is not going to involve destroying everything, unmaking everything, and that there's a different end in mind. and that's the end that this trumpet is sounding. Ultimately, God is eternal. If there are things that are not to be effectively unmade, even just by the passage of time, some of God's creation must become eternal as well. And that's where we're moving toward, is the real fulfillment of that covenant of the rainbow, right? If you're not going to let time itself unmake your creation, you have to make some of it permanent. And that's what we're trying to do, and that's what we're working toward. And we're about to, blow a trumpet and announce a change in the state of reality that ushers in permanence. And with that, we see, again, probably Jesus in the form of big angel saying, basically, let's get started and don't write any of it down. Fascinating idea. Not entirely sure why, other than that we're moving in a direction where you're not going to need the words written down anymore. That's kind of an age that is passing away, right? It's for John the Witness. It's the age you're in and coming from. That's how you all need to preserve knowledge. Is you have to write things down so you can give them to people to read. You don't need that now, because again, things are different and permanent and lasting now. And writing things down is trying to capture a thing that is fleeting and transitory, to make it more permanent. You don't need to take this step now, John, to make this is going to be etched into reality itself. You don't have to be doing it with your hand. So, neat start. Moving forward, we see now something that is incredibly reminiscent of the call of the prophets, especially the prophet Ezekiel, which is here's the scroll, eat it, and then prophesy, right? The idea, you're consuming God's words, which then you speak back out because you have consumed them. And the idea of, there's a contrast in the taste of this thing, right? Which is interesting. It tastes sweet going in because, God's word, what's going to happen, and bitter coming out. Oh, no, wait, this is what's going to happen. And, there's a sense, which we've seen with other prophets, of their speech being performative, right? There's this neat idea, Pope Benedict the 16th talks about in the book of Jesus of Nazareth, but it comes up in other places as well, of this idea of performative speech, right? There are some things that we say that affect the thing that they're being talked about, mostly in a legal context, but also in a liturgical context, right? All of our sacraments have words that have to be said, and the act of saying those words affects the reality. And there can be something that is both legal and sacramental in nature, right? With this ring I thee wed creates a legal reality and a sacramental reality. There is speech that brings about the thing that it says. Powerful concept. We see it with the prophets, right? It's an idea we haven't talked a lot about in the study previously, but that is arguably a component of prophecy, is that the things they say happen because they said them, which means prophecy shapes reality, which is a powerful idea to think about. It's not just predicting the future, it's creating the future. And it's not that the prophet sees ahead to something that's going to happen, it's that the words that the prophet speaks create the thing that happens. Radically different idea about what prophecy does. But then not all of those things are pleasant, right? Um, and it seems here like John, um, who is witnessing these things and being asked to prophesy, is being asked to play a part in the end of the world through his prophecy. It tastes bitter. He's bringing about the end of the world, right? The scroll is big and long and sealed, and a whole lot of it has come to pass, and there's this little bit left, and it's, for whatever reason, given to John to prophesy the end of the world. And through that prophecy, we see what happens. And in another sense, again, because that scroll we've talked about is the prophets before, is the words of is previous prophecy. In a way, John is just standing on the shoulders of giants, right? This is just a continuation of, and again, this is, in an almost literal sense, a regurgitation of existing prophecy to, again, focus on and to bring about this thing, which is the end of the world as we know it, the end of time as we know it, the end of reality as we know it, and to move humanity into what is, for all that we know right now, the end. Who knows? Maybe it's not. What we know is it's the end of this current phase of our journey. If there's another one after this, great. Let's get there and do that. But for now, that's the end of what this is. And prophecy is what gets us there, right? It's, for whatever reason, without, it seemed John was pulled up to witness these things and was given a part in it as not surrounded by angels, and Jesus, who is described more as an angel and not as a person, and all of the hosts of heaven, it is still given to a person to bring about this last phase, which is really very fitting because what's changing isn't heaven, it's earth. And maybe we have to have we have to have a part in bringing about the ultimate destiny of what's on earth. And again, that brings us back to, that's our job now too, right? Like, John is symbolically doing what all of us ought now to be doing, which is ingesting the words of the prophets, manifesting the result of that into the world and into reality, and bringing about the end of this phase of that reality so that we, the church and God's people, can move into the next one. John is all of us in that regard, right? He's not unique. We don't have unique prophets anymore. We talked about that. He is us, or I guess we, if we want to be grammatically correct, in that regard. And again, that's why this is so interesting, right? The role of the prophet has changed, and now the prophet is we. And once again, we get a section in the book of Revelation that draws heavily on especially the prophet Zechariah. So here, our protagonist is given a measuring rod and told, hey, go measure the temple. That measuring, very specifically, is a thing, especially when it's the temple, but is like marking out or measuring out the space for God, right? God's moving in. The temple is the desired destination. We're kind of marking out that as the space of God. The courtyard outside, where the non-believers hung out, by the way, is not being measured, right? So symbolically, this isn't just the building of a temple, right? This is you're figuring out where it's not unlike the marking of people, and that you're figuring out or carving out, marking out the place that's appropriate for God to go. And it doesn't have to be a geographical location. God's not so limited by space. So it's marking out and setting boundaries and limits on the place where God is to go. In the same context, you shift to these two witnesses and things that are going on, which leads us to the book of Zechariah, from where these images kind of directly come, which is important for a lot of reasons, because there's a series in the book of Zechariah of 7 visions, progressing and culminating. This is in the middle of it. We're also not quite to the end of our series of 7 things that have been happening here in Revelation. So again, that in and of itself is also kind of a repetition of something that the book of Zechariah previously did. Also, what do all of these things mean? In the book of here, you read, 2 witnesses and a bunch of lampstands and things. Olive trees, what on earth is that? And you can try to speculate all you want to, and the answer is, I don't know. But in the prophet Zechariah tells us that these things are associated with the coming of who he thought was the Messianic king Zerubbabel into power and into reign. And he had everything but the name, right? And that's what we're seeing here, is this is the coming of the king. We know and believe that Jesus was Messiah. He has not yet assumed political authority on earth, although that is an implied part of the role of Messiah that he didn't do while he was here. It doesn't mean that will never happen. And, like Zerubbabel, Jesus disappeared for a while, but he's coming back, whereas Zerubbabel, not so much. He just sort of disappeared. But Jesus is coming back, and he's going to fulfill all of these prophecies that were about vanished Zerubbabel, because they're not about Zerubbabel, they're about Jesus. And so he's going to come back, and he is going to be the promised king. And all of that you don't get from this passage in Revelation if you haven't read the prophet Zechariah. I know because I tried it. We went through this Revelation study, and I never made the connection for whatever reason to Zechariah while I did it, and I spent a long time trying to figure out what all this stuff meant, and I came up with nothing. It just seemed like this is a bunch of crazy stuff. I have no idea. Because you need, and that's the book of Revelation itself tells us this, right? The prophets are the key. They're the thing. I mean, it's in Revelation that you need that, and that's what it's doing. And yet it's so easy to miss somehow. So, a long way of saying, the book of Revelation does not make sense without the context that it was written to restate and reinterpret, which is the prophets. And here we see a promise of the coming of the Messiah. Here we get to what is the climax and the culmination of the book of Revelation, which is dead in the middle, which is not usual. But it is, the book of Revelation is constructed in a way that it builds up to, everything from the beginning kind of funnels into this central point, and then kind of expands back out from that in a restatement and a redevelopment of kind of another pass at what happened the first time. And it revisits a lot of the same things again, which is fascinating literary structure called chiasm. The Greek letter chi looks like our letter X, and it's that idea of, again, everything big outside, focusing in on kind of this central middle point. We don't tell stories that way much anymore. They never did. But it is possible, and we see that here. And so this is the dead center of the book of Revelation. This is also seems like the climax, right? We've been unsealing seals, and we've been blowing trumpets, and there's been all this buildup. And then we sound this last trumpet, which promises to bring about something big. We're not quite sure what. And then the trumpet sounds, and then here in the heavens we see by transition into chapter 12. And this is, Scott Hahn actually does a fantastic job setting up this thing in his book, Hail, Holy Queen. When he talks about this image of Mary in the book of Revelation. And he astutely observes, right, you have end of 11, you're expecting to see the Ark of the Covenant, right? And everybody's ready, and he'll look up into heaven, and it's the Ark of the Covenant. And then chapter 12, woman clothed with the sun. And what is that? Like, we were expecting the Ark of the Covenant. That's because this is the Ark of the Covenant, which is a good observation and an important point. Things are combining in on each other a lot here. The Ark of the Covenant, of course, the early Christian fathers made this connection as well, right? The Ark is the thing that held these, the manna from the desert, the staff of Aaron, and the tablets of the law, which are these sacred things of God. And Mary, in containing God himself, who we've talked about kind of what the new covenant is, and that Jesus himself is the new covenant, and our sharing in Jesus is that covenant. Like, she contains the new those are the things of the old covenant in the old ark. The thing of the new covenant is contained in Mary, the mother of God. And so she is very much the ark of the new covenant. And so we see this woman in heaven, and she's with child. And then we shortly see the dragon, who is also Satan. When you start talking about numbers of heads and horns and things, it definitely draws heavily from the book of Daniel. And what we said about that is as relevant here in terms of it not really being about any particular king or kingdom, and it being kind of not great to look at it that way, although a lot of people have tried, especially in Revelation. I would caution against that. And we see Michael. And we see Michael throwing the dragon out of heaven. The big thing I want to call to mind for reflection here is the question, when is this happening? So it was triggered by the sounding of the seventh trumpet, witnessed by John, but also probably bringing about the end of time and the world. So it's way in the future, right? But Mary we know Mary, right? It's not just some woman, it is Mary, is with child, has not yet given birth. So from John's point of view, it's in the pretty immediate past. But Michael is throwing the devil out of heaven, which is beginning of time, right? Like, before creation, beginning of time. And so, what is it? Beginning, middle, end. We've also talked about prophecy, how prophecies are multi-layered, right? Throughout this study, I've used the idea of light, which contains many different colors and ends up being split by a prism, and can be, all the colors of the rainbow. And it's all contained in a single, in white light. I think this is like prophecy in its pure form, right? Like not like red, like we saw maybe in Daniel, or like blue in Isaiah, or like purple in Ezekiel or something. This is like white light, right? This is like all of it combined. And so it manifests across different points in time, and it's the same reality about God, right? So this is like our reality summarized. Sure, God, Michael, is fighting with the devil, and keeping the things of God and the things of the devil separate. That is a truth and a reality that is important across all time. One we might not think of as important across all of time. Jesus is here, but is secondary in his presence here to his mother. Mary becomes a pivotal, this mother of God, the woman becomes a pivotal figure across all of time, right? And that was the problem in the beginning, was the woman wasn't this one, right? Like, didn't get it done. It wasn't that Adam failed, although he did. The problem was that Eve wasn't Mary, right? And the expectation was too much for a very mortal person. It's no great slight on Eve that she wasn't the most perfect human being ever created. I guess co-equal with Jesus. But Mary is a very special and unique thing, and she's we talk about this is the summit of all time and all creation, that is humanity and our world. That's Mary, the mother of God. From the beginning, pointing up until the birth of Christ and continuing on from there, the summit of all human creation is Mary, the mother of God. And it's only through that very human creation that salvation comes to humanity, right? She's human. She doesn't save humanity, but without her doing her part, humanity can't be saved. And she's just a person, like all of us. She's obviously a special kind of person, but she's not God. Jesus is God. She's a person. She is a human being in the full sense of what a human being was ever meant to be. And through her acceptance of God is a model for all of us. Because the idea is that while in this current state of reality in which we live, she is unique and outstanding among all of human creation. In a very real way, all of us have to share in and be a person like that at the end of time, right? Not completely, entirely like that, but we have to be like the perfect form of who we were created to be, eternally and for all time, with God. That's the thing we're coming to. And so, of course, she stands as a model of this, but as more than a model of this, as a model in the sense of something to strive for and to imitate as well. And so we see Mary, the Mother of God, standing literally floating in the heavens as this high point and this culmination here in the book of Revelation. Building out then from this conflict, right? We have this core central idea, and a part of it is this conflict between God and Satan that humanity gets involved in almost as collateral damage. Because Satan can't attack God directly, here we are. And then we transition into this beast. Once again, following imagery from the prophet Daniel. And once again, not worth over speculating who this might be manifested as. So many people have tried to figure that out. And again, it seems unlikely. The important point is that the devil is making war on humanity because he can't attack God directly, and that God allows this, right? But won't forever, right? The devil has been thrown out of heaven. What happens when heaven comes down to earth? The devil is still thrown out of heaven, and so the devil is thrown out also of earth. And so knowing that we're bringing that about and that is going to happen, all of the devil's works here on earth are inherently futile, right? It's lashing out. He thinks he has his way, but it's futility, right? He'll doom some people, but he won't win. He can't even attack God directly. He has to attack us and the earth. And he has no power against God. So whenever God feels like coming to the earth, the devil's gone. And so this is like the last desperate attempts of the devil to have any kind of relevance and any kind of power. And unfortunately, that will damn a lot of people who are swayed by him. He can still destroy people, and he can still destroy us. So we must be vigilant. And that's the takeaway here, right, is men worship the dragon and serve the beast. Don't be that way. Devil can't destroy God. He can destroy you. And he will not win. So it is futile to serve him, and it is your own damnation. So don't do that. Here's more of the same, right? We see the beast through blasphemy, again, and blaspheming of God and of all that is holy. Again, the beast's enemy is God, but the beast can't beat God. And so he's here trying to do any damage he can. But the thing he's hurting by that blasphemy is not God, it's us. And you see, he makes war against things and people that are holy, and tries to defame that which is holy. That can't possibly be a thing that is familiar to anyone when looking at the world in which we right now live. Right? That is the work of the devil in our world, is to try to profane the holy, and to, by so doing, to lead souls astray. And what you see here is anyone who's not really on Team God is going to be swayed. He does a good job. He's very good at what he does, and we're very gullible. And it doesn't help when he wins religious figures over to his cause. Think of how many people the scandal in the church led to leave the church. And in many ways, it's hard to blame them, except it's still the church, and it's still wrong to leave it. But those people did incalculable damage to the kingdom of God. But they won't win, right? They won't and they can't win, but so much damage can be done, and we can participate in that damage, and we can be damaged by it, and our eternal souls could be forfeit. So the call is one of vigilance, right? One of it really highlights the need to protect what's holy, right? To carve out and to emphasize the holy, and to keep it set apart and to keep it holy. Anything that we've seen it talked about in others of the prophets, but anything that starts to blur those lines, right? That starts to unseparate the holy, that's the work of the devil. And it seems like nothing at first, and it's insidious in that it profanes things that are meant to be holy, and it creates a slippery slope that leads to the damnation of many. Or at least that's the implication here, and it seems to make sense to me. Again, we draw from the prophets and from the history of the people of Israel. We see judgment and this woman who is this harlot who is Babylon, who is excess, and again we see sitting on a beast, right? What was the beast again, and what was it trying to get people to do, and what was the role of Babylon in the history of the people of Israel, right? They pulled God's people out of the Holy Land and led them to intermingle with ordinary people. By ordinary, I mean not the people of God, right? And there was a lot of intermingling and a lot of changing of behaviors. Now, we saw that through divine intervention, people came back, a remnant of the people returned more dedicated to God than when they left. But that was certainly not all of the people who returned. And certainly many stayed in Babylon and were lost. And that's the idea here, right? Is the harlot Babylon tempting God's people with all of the things that harlotry implies, and wine and excess and enjoyment. And of course, the beast is involved in that, right? Because these, again, are ways you desanctify, right? You profane the holy in every form. And this is another form of that that's happening. Babylon is also associated in the book of Jeremiah here with God's wrath, right? This is also like you go there because of God's wrath as well. And there's an intermingling of being in Babylon and experiencing the wrath of God. So all of that is sort of intermingled, but it's a continuation of the same idea we saw with the beast, right? It's a profaning of the things that are holy, and a call for us to continue to embrace God, to walk the narrow path, and to observe and to keep holy ourselves and our world to the extent that we can, to prepare for the coming of God. Here we get to, I know I said a bit ago, and I stand by this, that the middle of the book of Revelation is really the culmination. But from a narrative point of view, these last few chapters wrap up where we've been saying the story's going, and it's important to see. Here, with the wedding, who's getting married is an important question. His bride has made herself ready, I think, is probably the key idea here. That, and everybody previously has been washing their robes in the blood of the Lamb, right? And are now dressed in white. Everybody has been getting dressed for this wedding, but who wears white to a wedding? There are a whole lot of people who aren't supposed to wear white to a wedding. There's one person who is supposed to wear white to a wedding. So who's getting married? We know Jesus is the groom. It seems that we're the bride. And that, again, that image and that idea of God espousing his people, that goes way back to that's not new here. But the idea of you're really going to finally be wed and to consummate the wedding is now, right? We're not there yet, right? Like, we're moving there. We're very betrothed right now. But are we wed yet to God? No. Humanity and divinity are not completely intermingled. That's the end of time. And so here we're getting there, and that is happening. You do see the groom also portrayed as riding on a white horse. I mentioned before that that rider was not one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse as conceived so much as Jesus. And this hopefully makes that point. And again, shows how we revisit in Revelation things that were in the first half come back again in the second half, somewhat differently. So humanity and divinity are being wed. Here at last, we see the thing that we've been building toward. And this is why the book of Revelation is so important to have in the scriptures. This last bit of prophecy, this helps us see where we're going. The holy city, Jerusalem, comes down from heaven. It's not, they go to that place in the Middle East where Jerusalem is, and it's the holy city of God. It doesn't say where they are other than on earth somewhere. And God's holy city, and by implication also God, come down to earth. This is God's throne, this is God's city, not the copy, the bad copy that we built here on earth. And the best bad copy we had on earth involved the temple, right? Which was meant to be like the original ark of all things expanded, but was to be where God dwelled. You don't need a temple in this city because God now dwells with us everywhere. That's not a needed thing anymore. So it's Jerusalem, but the thing that makes Jerusalem special, it doesn't have, because everything is that now. And it's the holy city in that it's where God and God's people live. But it's not like the old Jerusalem. The doors are the 12 tribes, and the foundations are the 12 apostles. So it is an intermingling of the old and the new. You have the city built and entered through the history of this people, old and new. So, great, amazing culmination. One chapter left, but this is where we're going, right? And we've talked about it, is God comes and lives on heaven, lives on earth with us. Heaven is on earth. Right now, we can go live with God in heaven. Then God will come live with us on earth. In both cases, we are with God, but it's not the same thing. And where we're going is better than where we are. So finally, we see when heaven and earth have been joined. The high point where there was, or where there's very noticeably not a temple, what there is going back to Ezekiel, this water, this river of life, right? What do we have that uses that imagery now, right? That is, baptism gives life to us all already, right? That's the thing that's preserved here, is the river, the water of life, giving life to, proceeding from the middle of the city and giving life to everything, the whole world. And that's, I mean, now that is true symbolically, right? The waters of baptism give life to the whole world, and more than symbolically. But like the world itself, like the earth and the plants, don't receive life from that, right? It's just some of us who are baptized and who live up to our baptism. So it will again be that and much more than that. So we're going toward a place where there is no death and there is freely available life for all. And God and humanity live together. And our job is to bring that about, doing all of the things that we've talked about, continuing to ingest and to understand the messages of the prophets and to realize those in our lives, and by continuing to observe and to enforce those things that are sacred, that are holy and set apart. Or at least that's the implication here, and through other prophets we've seen other important ways to do that as well. An emphasis on repentance was here as well. So, in closing then, the prophets provided in the past and continue to provide now a roadmap for how to bring about the will of God in our world, and even the presence of God in our world. We've gone through now a couple of studies of the prophets because of how important that message is. Thank you for journeying along with us. I hope that your experience of the scriptures, and more importantly, your life, is richer for having gone through this journey, and you've found things that you have taken away that have helped you to grow closer with God, as that's the ultimate goal of Bible study, and that was the intention of these prophets as well. We will be moving forward into next year with a much more thorough look at Revelation in light of the prophets, and taken in and of itself, which will allow for the deeper look that we can't do in a couple lessons here. So we hope that you'll be interested in going along that journey with us as well. And check out any of our other studies and additional resources at turning to God's Word.com.